For the past 7 decades, Dr. Charles Bentley, Professor Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has conducted studies of glaciology and geophysics in Antarctica. In 1957, he and several other scientists set out on an expedition across West Antarctica in tracked vehicles to make the first geophysical measurements of the ice sheet. His 25-month study was a part of the International Geophysical Year, a worldwide scientific project exploring a wide range of Earth sciences. On January 14, 2010, Charlie Bentley was the guest speaker at a Wednesday session of the South Pole Sunday Science Talks in the galley of the new South Pole Station.
Thank you. Is this one of those mics I have to hold really close? Yep. Okay, I'll try and remember to do that. I want to start out by taking a look at Antarctica, or the interior of Antarctica as it was known in before IGY, about 1950, a little over 60 years ago. You see black areas there, which are the known mountain exposures or mountainous regions. And there were a lot of them because there was a lot of exploration in the 40s in particular and the 30s around the coasts of Antarctica. And of course the classic expeditions of Scott and Amundsen indicating the great, what now we call the Transantarctic Mountains in here, including the Queen Water Range. But the rest of the map, I think you'll be struck by the fact that there's nothing there but a big flat space of white. And that's because that's exactly what it was, how much was known about it. It was big and flat, more or less, and an expanse of white, completely unexplored. Now when the International Geophysical Year was put together, that was 1957-58, or as Pogo said, the International Geophysical Year and a half. Because it started in July of '57 and went to the end of 1958. Probably few of you are old enough to remember Pogo. But a major part of this International Geophysical Year, which covered the whole world, not just the polar regions, was the Antarctic concentration by a number of countries, 12 countries actually, half of whom undertook exploratory traverses into the interior of Antarctica. One of the people who was charged with finding men, it was only in those days, of course that was long before women were allowed in the U.S. program, to go to the Antarctic on the oversnow exploration traverses. Had his office right across from mine where I was a graduate student at Columbia University. And he decided he might as well start close to home, so he came into our bullpen where several of us were and said, who would like to go to Antarctica? And I didn't have a good thesis project and I thought that sounded like a pretty good idea. So I said, I would. And he said, okay, you're on, and it changed my life. It became my thesis project and my whole research career. So after some training in Greenland, then he started on the trip to Antarctica, which for all intents and purposes starts in New Zealand. And here's our little traverse party, 5 of us. There were 6, but I think the 6th one must have been taking the picture. And this is on the ship in Littleton, just south of Christchurch. Just as we were ready to depart from New Zealand on the way south. Now back in those days, the only way you could get to the Antarctic was by ship. There were no planes with enough range. And so we had to go by ship, and because we had to go by ship, we couldn't go in until late in the season when the sea ice broke back and the icebreakers could get through. That is pretty much as it is today. But it also meant that in order to get a full field season of work in exploration, geophysics, glaciology, geology, whatever, one had to go down at the end of a summer season, spend a whole winter in order to get a full field season. So that's what we all were doing. We were going down in 56, 57 to spend the winter of 57 in the Antarctic and then go and do our exploratory traverses. Here's the ship we went on. This is a World War II Victory class ship. No, Liberty class, sorry, Victory was World War I. I don't go back that far, by the way. It was thin-skinned. It was by no means an ice-strengthened ship, although our skipper thought that it was, and he had a habit of ramming into ice floes that made us kind of nervous. But so we head south from New Zealand and got to Cape Hallett, encountered stormy weather. The odd color on this slide leads me to a digression on Ektachrome film. Any of you remember Ektachrome film? Ektachrome was a substitute for Kodachrome. And the other slides that I'm showing are Kodachrome. This one is Ektachrome. And that color is not the natural color of that scene. Ektachrome was notorious for fading terribly. Whereas the Kodachrome slides that I'm showing, I've kept as slides until just a few years ago, so they were 50 years of slides without fading. So, a plug for poor old Kodak in its dying days. I get to the sea ice closer to McMurdo Sound. We were headed for McMurdo first and then going to go on to Little America. We ran into sea ice and the skipper decided it would be a good idea to have a real icebreaker. So here is one. If you look carefully, you can see the helicopter on the back deck. Helicopters were used even back then to search around for leads to make it an easier trip for the icebreaker and the ships that was accompanying. So we went in convoy. There was actually 2 icebreakers out in front here. These are wind class icebreakers, the standard of the day. And there's one here, another one here, and then a couple of Liberty ships, and then there's another one. Of course, the one the picture was taken from, and then I think there was still one more. It was a good-sized convoy. It wasn't possible to get all the way to McMurdo, but we got far enough to be able to get some standard photos that one has to show for any trip to the Antarctic penguins, which I probably don't need to show to many of you. But it did remind me that I wanted to make a comment about wildlife in those days. The penguins and the seals were completely unafraid of humans, as they fortunately largely still are. But at the time, there was no restriction on disturbing the wildlife. That came along quite a while later, about 1970. Not that we disturbed them, but there was no reason that we were given not to go up as close as we wanted to. And both the penguins and the seals show very little reaction until you get really close, like as close as I am to the bottom here. And the seal will just kind of raise his head a little bit. That's about all the reaction you get. Well, we didn't get into McMurdo, but our ship was headed for Little America anyway, so we turned east across the front of the Ross Ice Shelf, and passing tabular icebergs. That's probably about a 100-foot vertical cliff on that tabular iceberg. And then also some icebergs that were not tabular, just to prove that all Antarctic icebergs are not tabular icebergs. We got to Little America, the front of the Ross Ice Shelf near Little America, and found the exploratory crew had already found a low spot in the front that was not much higher than the deck of the ship. So we were able to offload from the cargo ship directly onto the ice shelf. That big box there is probably is an aircraft, probably a Beaver or a single engine Otter, put together at Little America. And here's Little America Station. Little America 5, the last of Admiral Byrd's stations. Admiral Byrd died shortly after the beginning of IGY, and as far as I know, we never visited Little America 5. But you notice, this is a typical IGY station with these Clement buildings here. I'll show those in more detail in a bit. The radome, the tracking weather balloons here. Byrd Prairie, after whom the Prairie Lab was named. George Toney, the first station scientific leader at Byrd Station. And here are a couple of weasels. And the weasel is a remarkable vehicle. The weasel was built as a amphibious attack vehicle for the Second World War. It was designed and built by Studebaker. And the idea was that it would go about 20 miles and then collapse. But there were many weasels left at the end of the war, and they had been over-engineered apparently because they had been driven for hundreds and hundreds of miles. They were the main vehicle of exploration in Greenland, and the first work of the French and the British in the 40s and in the earliest 50s, when I did my thesis work here. And they were still in use in Little America, and there are some of these weasels, I've been told, still in use at foreign stations around Antarctica. Quite a remarkable history, I think. Well, we're not due to stay at Little America. We're headed for Byrd Station. Byrd Station, on this map, I'm going to show it twice in the different orientation. This is the orientation that we used back in those days. Maps of Antarctica always showed the country that produced the map would put its side of Antarctica at the top. So this is the American view of Antarctica. A New Zealand view of Antarctica would have Cape Madeira at the top, so forth. I'm showing it this way because the writing is right side up, and then I'm going to show it on its side in a more familiar orientation. But what I wanted to emphasize here was that Little America is here, and we were headed for Byrd Station, which is out here. All these black lines on here are traverse routes that were covered in the course of the IGY and one succeeding year. So you see from a black-white space, we've added quite a lot of exploratory traverses in IGY. Well, here, this is Antarctica with the Greenwich Meridian up, as you're probably accustomed to seeing it. And the traverse route again now is down here in Little America, out the Byrd Station. So we collect our vehicles at Little America. They were on the ship with us. These are Tucker Snowcats. They look a little different from the normal Snowcat because they had cabs over the engine to make the engine easy to get at from the warm interior of the vehicle. That engine kept the interior of the vehicle so warm, though, that we often had to drive with our windows and doors and even the overhead hatch open just to stay cool. A couple of other words about the Snowcat. They were, are there any Snowcats here at Pole? No. Well, it's like another vehicle here. It had 4 pontoons, all of which turned, each one with a track on it. And it had these specially designed IGY Snowcats had benches built inside that were for sleeping and eating and doing all our experimental work, and also for cooking. So it got a little crowded sometimes. And they had a several thousand pound drawbar capacity, which turned out to be a big help. We pulled a couple of at the first we just pulled one sled with each one, a 1-ton sled, but they could pull a lot more than that. So we head out then for Byrd Station. Now the trail to Byrd Station had already been blazed by a Army-Navy exploratory party. A Navy party had tried to do it the year before, but they had failed. They were unable to get through the crevasses at the boundary between the Ross Ice Shelf and the interior of West Antarctica, badly crevassed, as many of you undoubtedly know. Another party then, an Army-Navy party. I say Army because the main part of the party was a group from the Transportation Arctic group that had much experience in Greenland, going through crevasse zones at the edge of the ice sheet and blazing trails into the interior of Greenland. So they undertook to get through the crevasses. So at this time, nothing had been able to get out to Byrd Station because they were relying on overland heavy tractor traverses to get there. And this group eventually managed to blaze a trail through a heavily crevassed zone. Turns out to be at the foot of ice stream D, or mid-shadow ice stream, as we discovered many years later. And they did it by filling a whole lot of crevasses full with a D8 blade, and made it safe for heavy tractors to go through. And they marked the good spots and the bad spots with a whole series of different colored flags. So the whole zone came to be known as Fashion Lane. And as far as I know, it's still known as that if it was ever used again. So we had a marked trail then going out to Byrd Station that we had to follow, rather than blazing our own way. Now we were doing more than just driving out there with our vehicles. We had scientific experiments to do. We were doing echo sounding, seismic echo sounding for ice depth, aneroid altimetry for surface elevations, gravity measurements, magnetic measurements, snow pit studies for snow accumulation rate measurements, and temperature measurements. We had a whole collection of measurements that we were making along the way. Now, because of the altimetry, and the aneroid altimeter responds to pressure changes due to elevation changes, but also due to the weather changes. So to get rid of, as well as we could, the weather changes, we had the vehicles traveling separated. One went 5 miles ahead of the other two, and the read altimeters simultaneously in the two vehicles, with the idea that the weather changes would be rather similar over at both ends of a 5-mile line. So most of the difference in elevation, in pressure, would be due to difference in elevation. Then we had to add the elevations up at the end, and adding up a lot of little numbers is not a very accurate way to proceed. So aneroid altimetry is not close to GPS in its accuracy. It's approximately 3 orders of magnitude less accurate. But it was what we had at the time. So we try, and then the other aspect of our work that I want to mention is that we traveled one day, about 50 miles a day, with our vehicles separated, stopping every 5 miles to make the pressure measurements and some other ones. And then we would, at each 50-mile marker, these spots were already marked out on this Army-Navy drive. We'd stop and spend the whole day doing more specialized measurements, the seismic sounding, the snow pit studies that took more time. The Army-Navy drive people had left fuel caches for us, so we had to we were able to pick up the gasoline we needed. The snowcats ran on gasoline. Later they ran on diesel. So after about a month on the trail, we arrived at Byrd Station, finding it a work in progress. Now here's one of those Clements buildings. You can see how it goes together with a steel framework, and then panels that clip into place. There's the floor going in, here the walls are in, and they're working on the top, on the roof. And then here's a completed Clements building with a, sorry, I'm not very good about holding this up. With a tarp put over it to keep the heat from the building from causing leaks into the interior. They went up very rapidly, all held together with metal clips. And they served the original McMurdo station was built out of Clements buildings, as was the buried South Pole station here, the first South Pole station, and Byrd Station, of course. So they were a great success. They were a lot tighter than a Jamesway. Now, when we got to Byrd Station, as I said, we found it was a work in progress because the tractor train had only gotten out there very late in the season because the Fashion Lane had only been flagged late in the season. And so the construction crew simply hadn't had enough time to finish building the station before they had to leave on the tractor train so they could get out of there and not spend an unexpected winter in Antarctica. So we had to help, we the scientists helped the station support people who were all Navy in those days, build the station. And I think that was probably a good exercise for maintaining mutual respect between the two groups, because we had no problem of conflict between the civilians and the Navy. We had a little trouble with building the station though. One of the things that happened was that the planners for IGY expected us to put up magnetic stations. Now, in a magnetic station, you don't want walls that are full of steel nails. So they had arranged to have special magnetic Clements building panels made out of copper nails instead of steel nails. And they were carefully marked with a big M after the designated number on each panel. Well, somebody in Little America couldn't be bothered with things like M's, so they took the non-magnetic panels and just made some storage shed or something like that out of it, and took some of the steel nail panels and put M on them and shipped them out to Byrd Station. So when the building was put together, and the magnetometer, the magnetic station guy tried to make readings, he couldn't do anything at all. And he soon discovered that he was getting a strong signal every time he moved closer or further away from one of the walls. So, fortunately, the prescient people in Washington had provided him with a big bag of copper nails. So what we had to do was take the panels apart, pull every nail out, and rebuild all the panels with copper nails. And then we had a good working magnetic station. Now the last building to go up was the Aurora Tower. That's what you see there. And the Aurora Tower was wonderful for recreation. If nothing, I'm sure it got good auroral data too. But we all, since the aurora could be seen if it wasn't cloudy 24 hours a day, and that there was only one auroral observer, we all took turns so we wouldn't have to be up there 24 hours a day for 4 months. And Byrd Station turns out to be right below the auroral arc, the auroral circle. So there were anytime you could see the sky, it was at least a quiet art, and often something a lot more spectacular than that. There was time to do, before the winter set in, there was time to do some surveying. These guys are out in about, I think it was about 60 below, which doesn't impress you people here at the pole. But I want to say something about the clothing here. IGY clothing, special clothing that was issued, let's start over here. This is down, complete down suit. This is Byrd cloth, windproof cloth over the down suit. Bear paws. You get bear paws for the winter time here? Yeah. So it's the same old bear paw that served well for 60 years. And then they're caribou skin mukluks from Alaska, dog skin. He has dog skin mitts on, also from Alaska. And then the weird thing is this full face mask. I don't know how many of you use full face masks in the wintertime. Maybe you need them around here. But we had both full face masks and another one that I'll show in just a minute. But the full face mask was a terrible nuisance. Most of us tried it once and then never tried it again because you couldn't. It was very hard to breathe. It was hard to see anything out of those little holes for the eyes. And it was hard to drink anything through that little hole for the mouth. So what we found worked much better than the full face mask was this one, which is a nose and cheek mask. Now I haven't seen these recently, but these are marvelous. I think skiers must be familiar with these. But they cover just the vulnerable part, your nose and the cheekbones. And they don't obstruct your vision at all, or any other, or blowing your nose or letting it drip, or drinking or eating. In fact, when you have one of these things on, you don't even know you have it on, except that your nose and cheeks stay warm. Oh, another thing, this is a later version, actually, of the down parka. You can see that the hood had already improved a great deal. The original hood had no fur band, no metal band to hold it in shape. And it was quite inadequate. And of course, this is much better. But the everyday clothing was not any of that esoteric stuff. It was good old Army cold weather gear from the Korean War vintage. Most of us had some additional items of our own. Like the down vest was an IGY issue. And this cap here with the red ear flaps, that's me, by the way. That was not a current Army issue. But this Army clothing worked very well. It was warm. The only problem with it was very heavy. It had removable liners, wool liners, and we were quite happy with it. You can see everybody's wearing his Army clothes, not any of that down stuff. This is actually the crew at the end of the first year's travels. But I put it in here to show the clothing. Okay, now we move in for the first winter at Byrd Station. There was plenty to do. Here I am adjusting, working on our seismic system to get it ready for the upcoming field season. We also worked on data. Some of us did, some of them did. I didn't do this. Dig a deep pit to study the history of snow accumulation. My contribution to this activity was to almost kill a man. This is over the top of the deep pit. There's a couple of guys down below. And I had a snap book that I was attaching to that heavy box of drill sections. Only I didn't get it snapped properly, and the box of drill sections fell all the way down. If it had hit anybody on the head, I think it would have killed him. Unfortunately, missed by 6 inches or so. So that was my contribution to deep pit digging. Shoveling snow for the snow melter, that's the side of the generator shack. They use the exhaust heat and generated heat from the electrical generators to melt water. Also had ham radio contact with the United States. In my 2 years there, the first year we had very poor contact. It was not a good antenna setup. Radio conditions were terrible, terribly noisy, and as a result, we had to be very limited in the number of times we were allowed to call home. I think I called back home twice during the whole winter. That's 6 months. One guy who was a cook, who was kind of a sourpuss anyway. In fact, that wasn't the only way to describe him, because another example of his character was that he had posted over the beginning of the food line a nude picture of his girlfriend. So in the middle of the winter, he finally got his turn to call home to this girlfriend. So as was the want with the ham radio system, the ham radio operator in the States gets on the phone, calls the recipient of the call. So he did that, Jules Mady, and he said, I have a collect call for you from I have a collect call from you from Bob Marsh in Antarctica. Will you accept the charges? And she said, no. No, she said, how much are they? And he said, 15 cents. And she said, no. That tells you something about what kind of a relationship they had. Well, he was a sour guy before that, but boy, was he sour after that. At the end of the season, when we were going off on our first traverse, we had a little trouble getting going. And we had difficulty with gyro compasses, and I'll say a little bit more about them probably in a moment. I don't ramble too far afield. But several times, the gyro compass was very sensitive to motion, and we could not damp it well enough to make it work properly. So we'd start off on our traverse and get a few miles and realize that we weren't properly, we had no way of navigating properly, and go back into the station. And after this happened about the third time, this Bob Marsh, who was the cook, went into the station scientific leader ranting and raving and saying he knew for sure that we were doing this just to foul up his meal schedule. Well, of course, he didn't say foul up. Well, later on, when we were out on traverse, we relied on resupply flights from Byrd Station to bring us our fuel so we could keep going. And on Christmas Day one time, the resupply flight came out, and in it were 2 beautiful pies from Byrd Station, baked by Marsh. I thought, oh boy, he's finally forgiven us, isn't that nice? Until we took a bite into one of the pies and found it was so laced with red pepper it was uneatable. So I guess he never did forgive us. The second year we had husky dogs as pets, and it turned out one was a male and one was a female. And these pups were born in midwinter. And of course that was a great event for everybody. That's sort of an example of emblematic of the difference between the 2 seasons at Byrd Station. The first year, because of the the problem in getting the station started, a lot of the supplies didn't get out, the less important ones. We had the important ones like all the fuel we needed, and all the food we needed, and all the beer we needed, but not of the right kind. An aside on that, it turns out, maybe some of you have had this experience, or maybe it's not true anymore. All we had was Budweiser and Schlitz. And the problem was that all the beer had been frozen. So we were drinking thawed beer. Now Schlitz, when it thaws, at least the Schlitz of those days, produces a wonderful crop of goobers. Just little white specks that float around in the beer. And Budweiser doesn't do that. So there was you could exchange one can of, it took at least 5 cans of Schlitz to get 1 can of Budweiser. To get one that something you could actually drink. But there was no the only hard liquor at all was the medicinal alcohol that the station scientific leader, who was also the doctor, issued on rare occasions. We had no recreation space except the galley. But to me, what some people call it a hardship winter, I didn't consider it hardship. The hardship we had was not having a pool table, and not having a ping pong table, not having a separate rec room. Of course, nobody had television sets in those days. So neither year was really a hardship. But it was a lot more plush in the second season when we had those extra amenities that I mentioned. Now back to the end. This is the end of the winter night. The sun just coming up over the horizon for the first time, and you can see the Byrd station. Or you can interpret this picture as Byrd station being completely covered by snow, because it is. You see nothing except a couple of sticks sticking up. From Byrd station. It was originally laid out on the surface. But the snow, it was a windy spot, and the drifts soon built up to the level of the surface of all the buildings except the Aurora Tower. So it's time. It wasn't. This is one of our snowcats at the end of the winter, completely buried up to the roof like everything else outside, and plenty of snow inside. So we had a lot of digging out to do before we were ready to go off for our summer's field season. Haircut. I did not. I'm the one under the clippers there, and I didn't. Nobody in those days wore hair long then. I mean, and I didn't want to have long hair by the end of the summer field season, so I had it all shaved off before we started. That solved that problem very nicely. We finally were ready to go on our traverse. Notice over here a Wanigan that we built for ourselves during the winter out of parachute and lumber, and that was a godsend. We could get all the messy food, have a decent place to sit down and eat, and reserve the snowcats for the work that they were really designed to do. We got the parachutes, by the way, because during the resupply season early in the year, early in the summer, there were a lot of airdrops, and some of which got away. One of the airdrop cart supplies pallets got away. The wind picked up the parachute. This was right, and it turned out that this particular pallet was carrying all the winter accumulation of mail. The wind got a hold of the parachute and dragged it off a couple hundred miles south towards the Portland Mountains. And I think in this case, the station crew managed to catch up with it in some kind of a vehicle. But at least one got away completely. Never was recovered. Now, our traverse route now is to go from Byrd Station north, and then to the east, and then in the trapezoidal pattern back to Byrd Station. The routine on that traverse was rather similar to what I've already described, so I won't say it again. We just did it at 3-mile intervals instead of 5-mile intervals. And a few stops though, we spent several days for still more extended work like seismic long refraction profiles and deeper snow pits. This beautiful looking snow pit is not typical of the everyday product of a working glaciologist. One of the exciting things on this traverse was the discovery of a volcano that was previously unknown. That's it in this picture. It also was near the place where we got our first resupply flight on this traverse from the Navy pilots. And the plane that flew out to resupply us was named Takahe, after the newly discovered, still extant bird in New Zealand that is thought to be extinct. The pilots named the plane Takahe, and we named the mountain Takahe after our first resupply plane. And that name is still, and that's its current name. There's a resupply, one of the resupply flights with R4Ds. The R4D was, at least some of you aren't familiar with that, R4D is the Navy version of a DC-3. And that's jet-assisted takeoff, or JATO. The JATO really gives some of you may have been in Hercs with JATO, and it just sort of gently pushes the Herc along. But JATO attached to an R4D, a little plane like that, was really moving the rear, I'll tell you. And it did the job. It got the planes off the ground. One of our lesser successes on the traverse was this crevasse detector. The crevasse detector has booms out in front of a snowcat and several dish pans, 4 dish pans, 2 of which act as a receiving pair and 2 as a transmitting pair for a low frequency electric signal. The idea that was that a crevasse, this void space, would interfere with the transmission of the signal, and that would give a blip on an instrument panel, and so we know that we should stop and probe for a crevasse. This instrument was used very successfully, actually, in finding the way through Fashion Lane. But in Fashion Lane, they were going at 1 or 2 miles an hour because they had a limited. They had to do very detailed work over a very short distance. The whole length of Fashion Lane was only 7 miles. So it worked well under those circumstances. But we could not run a traverse of 1,200 miles in the course of one season traveling at 1 or 2 miles an hour. So we had to travel, our standard traveling speed was about 7 miles an hour, really ripping right along. Well, at speeds like that, the dish pans from the crevasse detector would bounce up into the air a foot or so every time we hit a sastrugi. And of course that would produce an air, a break. There would be a break between the pan and the snow. And that would produce a crevasse-like signal. And we got so many signals like that it was impossible to stop every 30 seconds to go out and probe for a crevasse. Furthermore, I believed in my ignorance at the time that we were continent side of all the crevasses and we weren't going to encounter any anyway. So we turned the crevasse detector off, but we left it sitting out there in front of the snow cap because in a whiteout, being able to see that dishpan bounce up in the air gave you a wonderful advance notice of rough sastrugi. So it didn't work as a crevasse detector, but it worked as a sastrugi detector. Some storms along the way, but mostly the weather was pretty nice. Eventually we learned how to avoid messes like this. The worst thing was to have the drift cover over the seismic cables because you had to be very careful digging out seismic cables not to cut the cable. And they didn't slide, and they were frozen, stuck to the snow. But we learned that we had to pick up the cables right after doing our measurements and not let this sort of thing happen. Now, I have very carefully in this slide mismarked the location of Mount Bentley, which is actually way over at the right, unassociated with that red line. It is right there. Nice peak. When we got to near the eastern end of our traverse, we expected to find a small mountain called Mount Alder. What we found instead was the whole Sentinel Range, which is perhaps the most spectacular mountain range in all of Antarctica. And it includes the highest peak in Antarctica. And all of this had apparently been hidden behind the clouds from previous people like Lincoln Ellsworth flew across from the peninsula to Little America, and he saw Mount Alder, but he didn't see any of the rest of this. So we had this mountain range appearing up over the horizon as we approached. Every day we traveled 30 miles. The mountain range would get higher and higher. Each day we thought, well, we're going to be there tomorrow. When we finally got there, we saw what a spectacular range it was, and also realized that this is an unmapped mountain range. So we named peaks that we did some surveying. We surveyed in a bunch of peaks, named them after all members of the IGY glaciology committee, and every big shot we could think of we thought deserved a peak, and we still had some mountains left over. So we decided, what the hell, we'll name them after ourselves. Well, it's not quite that simple. There are rules that you follow when you're naming something. But we suggested the names of the Traverse Party members for the juicy peaks in the Sentinel Range. And lo and behold, they were accepted by the U.S. National Committee on names, and they're still there. So that's why there's a Mount Bentley. On the way back to Byrd Station, we passed over the deepest, a spot where the ice was 4,500 meters thick and the bed was 2,500 meters below sea level, which is now claimed by some, not including me, to be the lowest spot on the surface of the solid Earth that's not actually underwater. That's now Bentley subglacial trench. So I claim the distinction of being the only person that I know of who has both a hill and a hole named after him. Second winter at Byrd Station, and then I'll wrap this up pretty quickly here. The station was starting to go to pot, but it was, as I mentioned before, a lot more comfortable in some unimportant ways than the first station. So now what happened was I was not scheduled to stay over for a second year, but I was so interested in what we've been finding, which was that all the bed of the whole part of West Antarctica that we've been studying was way below sea level. It would all be open water, even after it took the ice away, even after allowing for isostatic rebound. So I wondered how extensive that was. It was completely contrary to what was believed before IGY to be the characteristic of West Antarctica under the ice. It was thought to be a mountainous terrain, and it turned out to be just the opposite. So I wanted to see how far that extended. And I thought I'd never have another chance, because in my typically clouded crystal ball, I figured IGY is going to be over, and it will be another 50 years before there's another international polar year, and I won't be able to find the answer to these questions, so I'd re-up. Then, of course, all the countries that put IGY together got together and continued the program for every year since. So, but I never was sorry that I did it. Down around this way. The situation turned out to be rather similar there, except there were some white mountains to climb, which made it nice. There's some guys getting ready to climb over the mountains. There's a shot from the top of one of the peaks in the Voyage mountains. And in the course of the climb of this peak here, that peak there, one of the geologists who was there as a glaciologist, but he was really a geologist, he found Glossopteris leaves, which are a fern some of you may have heard of, famous in earth science, because the Glossopteris could live only in a climate a warm climate where there are alternate day and night. And so it could not have been living in Antarctica, where Antarctica had been where it is now. That was one of the early proofs of continental drift. Okay, well, I'll just finish with some slides. Now don't try, I know you can't read that slide, and I don't want you to try. Just look at the color bands. This is a map of surface elevations as they were known after the IGY and 116 years. The darkest colors are high elevations, so you can see high elevations up to 4,000 meters in East Antarctica over here. Some high in West Antarctica, but much lower. Deep indentation from the Anery Ice Shelf Lambert Glacier system here. And those are the main characteristics of the ice sheet as we know them now. Now, ice thickness, the same thing. The deepest color band is the thickest ice. So we have thick ice in East Antarctica where the elevation is so high, but also over here in West Antarctica because of that low-lying bed that kept me hanging around for an extra year. And here is an indication that came from the Russian work, the Soviet work, of the Byrd subglacial mountains, which of course is what AGAP is aimed at. So already by the end of IGY, by 1960, the deep bed of West Antarctica, which is responsible for its being suspect of instability, and this mysterious huge mountain range, Byrd subglacial mountains were already known. And finally, snow accumulation rate. This is the dark colors are the highest snow accumulation rates. We have practically no snow accumulation at all throughout central East Antarctica. So the pole is actually quite high relative to the surrounding region here. The Hawaii, of course, we didn't have the full region covered. Higher snow accumulation here, highest out near the coast, as one could expect. So many of the basic features of the ice sheet were known already by 1960 at the end of the IGY. Very successful time for all involved. And now I will leave you with another beautiful ectochrome shot of Mount Discovery, the Clements Huts at Byrd in 1959, and a wonderful collection of ugly wires. Thank you very much.